To our viewers joining us from around the world, welcome. Donald Trump's trade strategy is the center of an unfolding legal drama. After two federal courts ruled most of his tariffs illegal, an appeals court reinstated them on Thursday. Trump used an emergency powers law to impose sweeping import taxes on most of the world. And what he called reciprocal tariffs were launched with great fanfare on April 2nd on what Trump called Liberation Day. Judges at two courts ruled that the president had overstepped his authority. Tariffs, they said, are the constitutional domain of Congress, not the White House. But the appeal process now keeps them in effect, at least temporarily. Well, this legal tussle is set against a backdrop of global trade tensions and market uncertainty. Last week, the U.S. president announced tariffs up to 50% on the European Union, only to put them on pause until July 9th. The Trump administration sharply criticized the intervention of the courts.
America cannot function if President Trump, or any other president for that matter, has their sensitive diplomatic or trade negotiations railroaded by activist judges. President Trump is in the process of rebalancing America's trading agreements with the entire world, bringing tens of billions of dollars in tariff revenues to our country, and finally ending the United States of America from being ripped off. These judges are threatening to undermine the credibility of the United States on the world stage. The administration has already filed an emergency motion for a stay pending appeal and an immediate administrative stay to strike down this egregious decision. But ultimately, the Supreme Court must put an end to this for the sake of our Constitution and our country.
I'd like to welcome Bernd Lange, a chairman of the European Parliament's Committee for International Trade, currently in Washington, leading a delegation of EU lawmakers discussing trade. So welcome. As this legal tussle works its way through the courts, is it changing the way that the EU is going to be going into negotiations with the United States?
So, good evening, and thanks for having this chat. Yes, I'm here in Washington, and we are really trying to convince our American counterparts that we should find a solution to avoid a tariff trade war. And this so-called baseline tariffs are indeed, in our understanding, not justified and not in line with the legal system of the United States. And therefore, we are quite reluctant looking what the different level of court will decide on that. We wanted to have a stable relation, which is really based on common understanding, which is benefiting both sides and not one is giving pressure to the other side.
And as you're meeting with the different stakeholders in Washington, what is your impression? Is the mood there one that will be swayed by these arguments that you're bringing?
I'm convinced that this message that we want to negotiate an agreement which is benefiting both sides is acceptable for a lot of stakeholders. We spoke with trade unions, with business, with civil society, with Congress people, and also with administration. I hope that this signal, let's sit together and find a solution, is also reached by the White House. And that's a little bit surprise from my side that at the end of the day, really the decision is taken by President Trump. This is quite new. We have to learn that. I hope that our visit can really make a difference because at the end of the day, we should find a solution and not escalate. But of course, the European Union is a strong economic force, and we are ready, if needed, also defend our interests. So negotiation when possible, but of course retaliation if necessary.
So if there is no deal by the now July 9th deadline, what specific retaliatory measures would the EU be prepared to take, and how quickly?
Of course, it's a little bit depending what the legal situation then is. At the moment, we are faced mainly with tariffs based on the 232 Act, and there are some facts and figures, and we can discuss this. This is different to the so-called baseline issue, and therefore we think we could discuss about different tariff levels, about extra purchase from Europe to the United States on LNG, on semiconductor for AI. We saw just before the NVIDIA development. So there are possibilities to work together also in the international field on the global steel question, the overcapacity from China. So let's look for a framework which is reachable before the 8th of July, knowing that this will be not a comprehensive trade agreement. The details have to be developed. But for us, it's so important to have a stable situation, and with a framework understanding, this should be the end of the story, not coming with additional tariffs in some weeks or months. No, we want to have a stable situation for trade and for investors.
So it sounds like you think July 9th is not necessarily a hard deadline if you are able to find some kind of framework agreement at least a day before. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, we want to reach it, and now the negotiations are really under speed, different to some weeks ago. That's good. And let's see what's possible. Of course, this needs also some compromise on both sides. We are flexible, but as I mentioned before, if there's no agreement possible, then we will set tariffs on a lot of US products, which is really harming also the interests of the United States, specifically in the agriculture sector, where asked problems currently there. And I hope that also from the agriculture sectors, there will be a signal to the White House, avoid further escalation. Let's have a solution on negotiations.
Now, one of the reasons many of Trump's supporters supported these tariffs was his promise that these would help shift manufacturing back to American soil. How do you respond to the idea that EU exports are somehow undermining American industry?
Yeah, first of all, it's a decision by industry or by consumers which product they are buying. If they are Ford or Porsche buying, if they are machinery from Europe or machinery from the United States buying. And of course, the prices of goods from Europe are sometimes really higher than the prices of goods from the United States. But of course, I can understand that in the long run, the trade deficit in goods is unstable. And therefore, we could really find some solutions to reduce this deficit in goods. But on the other side, the United States have a surplus in services, big one. And I guess we should really look to the whole picture, and then the differences are not so big anymore. And this, I guess, should be recognized in the United States as well.
Bernd Lange, Chairman of the European Parliament's Committee for International Trade. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on DW.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Let's get across to Washington, D.C. and our bureau chief there, Ines Pohl. Ines, so we've heard an appeals court now having reinstated Trump's tariffs just hours after they were deemed illegal by the U.S. Court of International Trade. Amid all this back and forth, just give us a sense of where this leaves things.
Yeah, definitely another one of these roller coaster days here in the United States, which we have quite some of lately, Claire. So that basically means that most of the tariffs which were announced on Liberation Day, or so-called Liberation Day, are back in place. The Trump administration had earlier told the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit that it would seek, I quote here, emergency relief from the Supreme Court as soon as Friday if the tariff ruling was not quickly put on pause, which just happened now.
Yeah, if the Trump team does eventually lose its appeal on this issue, what would it mean for Donald Trump's trade agenda?
Right, and this still can happen. So it would be a big blow if the court would strike down all the tariffs imposed by Donald Trump under the guise of a national emergency. That's what he used here. So whether fentanyl or border security or trade deficits, all of that would be deemed illegal and stopped, basically.
Yeah, and we should say this, of course, happening as there are multiple trade talks underway between the United States and other countries. Where does this legal tussle leave those diplomatic discussions?
Right, so Donald Trump's trade agenda is basically in limbo. You know, Claire, these tariffs, they are his primary leverage as he looks to pressure other countries into striking trade deals with the United States. And after this forwards and backwards, today resetting trade relationships will be even more complicated. You know, I think many world leaders and many business makers think now the United States kind of needs to sort itself out first before they start negotiating with others again. Other governments will be wondering if they should make concessions to Donald Trump if the tariffs are deemed illegal in the end. And, you know, it's also important to understand, Claire, that tariffs are fundamental for Donald Trump's policies, as this is how he wanted to finance his political agenda. For example, his tax cuts for the very richest. So without these massive tariffs, he will have a very difficult time to finance his ideas of a great America.
Yeah, that's a really good point. For those who are just joining and maybe haven't been following the twists and turns of all this and are a bit confused, can you just remind us how all of this came to be?
Yeah, so it's interesting that the U.S. business initiated the lawsuit against Trump because these businesses, the small businesses, were supposed really to be helped by this tariff policy of Donald Trump. That's at least what he said. So this decision was made in a multi-state lawsuit led by the Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield, and he said after the first ruling from last night, which banned the tariffs, that, I quote him here, we brought this cause because the Constitution doesn't give any president unchecked authority to upend the economy. And he said, this ruling, last night's ruling, reaffirms that our laws matter and that trade decisions can't be made on the president's whim. So this, of course, is in the core of this whole debate. How much power does President Donald Trump really have? And is there anything which can stop him? And if all these causes will end up in the Supreme Court, will the highest court in this country, will the Supreme Court be willing to stop President Donald Trump if he is attacking the rule of law? So this is the overall question, and we, of course, will try to follow and deliver answers over the next days, months, and years.
Yes, we will. We'll see what the Supreme Court has to offer, perhaps. Ines, Pohl for us in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much, as always.